Hey there everybody, thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at this new release. Well, I guess it's a year old now. I've kind of been waiting on this one because I was hoping that Tori would read it and talk about it with me because it's kind of in that topic of, well, it is exactly the topic of grief and loss that, we kind of tend to do videos about together, but she just hasn't really been up to reading mentally, and so I wanted to get to it because I was looking at another Anders Nilsen book, and it reminded me how much I really enjoyed this and wanted to talk about it. So this is came out last year. It's the re-release of his book, The End, which is basically compilation of journal pages that he had done after the death of his at the time fiance. So it's really a meditation on the grieving process and moving forward and how that impacts someone's life. And of course, Anders Nilsen is just one of the great avant-garde of comics, I think. And this is maybe his most powerful. I haven't read all of his work, but I think this is the most powerful one I've read. Luckily, I got it in the Fanabucks sale, and I was early enough that I got a little signed book card here with it, so that was cool. And right out the opening, you get this little 2-panel thing that's got this little bathroom door guy that he uses to represent himself, and it says, so this is all there is: pain, suffering, death, betrayal, jitter, anxieties. And then it says, well, no, well, yeah, sort of. And I guess that could be a turnoff for a lot of people. But if you know what you're getting into in the book, I think that's something that we've all felt at times, I'm sure. And given what me and Tori are still going through with all of the long COVID stuff and how that still has her out of commission almost a year later, we're dealing with grief in that way too, because in some extent you do feel kind of dead alive where you can't do as much and stuff. So this book really, I think is touching. And even though it's coming from his own experience, it's processed in a way where Anders Nilsen can be so succinct and so iconic with his images, like here, where you just get this kind of person charring and falling apart, that it takes something very personal in particular and speaks to the universal. I think he's really good at finding those moments that pretty much anyone who's gone through this can relate to, and anyone who hasn't gone to can get a sense of. And there's a lot of wisdom. So I just want to go through and show some of the different stylistic things that he does, some of the writing that I liked, just things like that. I think this is a really powerful book that everyone should read. One of the first things that is in here, and I'm assuming these are arranged largely chronological because it reads that way, where the beginning ones are obviously purely in the grief phase, and then you hit anger phase and kind of acceptance, and like the different stages of grief that he goes through are very clearly delineated. But he says, since you've been gone, I can do whatever I want all the time. And then he just has all these examples of me crying while doing the dishes, me crying while trying to work on the computer, me trying to hold it together on the train. So there is that, especially because I'm in a caretaker role, you do lose a lot of your personal freedom because you have to look out, a lot of that time has to go into the other person. And Tori's really good about giving me space for it, but I think selfishly people is, even probably if you're in a healthy relationship, you have to make concessions and things. And so this idea of like, hey, I'm single, I can do whatever I want, how great. But it's like, yeah, it's not that great. Like, you could do whatever you want, but you're miserable. I also relate this to, I got married when I was really young. I was 23 when I got married, and divorced by the time I was 27. And I think it's not the same as someone dying, but there is a sense of loss in life, and so I can relate to it in that way as well, where it's like, yeah, you could go do whatever you want now, but you really just don't have the energy. And that he's packaged it up in a way that's like bitterly humorous, I think is really nice as well. And then here you get his really nice, like, clean line, more detailed style that he used on I'm gonna forget the name of it, but the book with the birds. I think that's, like, look-wise, one of my favorite things that he does. Another thing that I really like that I've seen now in a couple of his books is he has these almost like, I don't know, they look like ancient diagrams or something that he comes up with, just these little abstract patterns that he does. And at first I was like, what is this maze-like structure that he's putting up? But then you start to realize that he's talking a bit about potential, alternate realities, the way things could have gone but didn't, and that those kind of things haunt you. So here he's saying, like, what could I be without you? What could my life be with you? What could it be without you? And he's going through the possibilities, and you just get this like branching thing here, and that he's handling again in the abstract like that, I think really lands the point in a way that's universal. It takes a little bit more interpretation, but it really, I think, hits the heart of the issue in a universal way that's quite beautiful. Here, I'm just going to read this page because some of it is just like pages that he's written in his notebooks, maybe with a little bit of drawing, but this is maybe one of my most, this is one of the pieces of writing that is encouraging to me in a way, and I think he does a good job of that too. Like, as he starts to heal, he's sharing the lessons that he's learned with people. And so, like, I was rereading this the other night, getting ready to make the video, when I had been kind of having a hard day myself, with this, like, man, it's just struggle, 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 and this piece, is bolstering in a way. So it's called Maybe You're Looking at This the Wrong Way Around. And he has this line, it's an eternity of this, followed by a tiny blink of light and activity, that's your life, followed again by another limitless eternity of this. So a nice little quick diagrammatic drawing to explain the idea of eternity. And then he says, like, what if you grew up knowing that one day out of your whole life, just once, for 5 minutes, you would suddenly be able to fly, but you never knew when. When that moment came, you would do it, right? No matter what. You wouldn't stay in your cubicle because of your obligations. You'd go. Even if you were standing at the altar, even if you were at a funeral, you'd walk away and you'd go flying. We experience eternity in that moment, that lifetime. But this emphasis in that proposition is the word experience, not the word eternity. Eternity is eternal. It's constant. We poke our heads through the curtain once for a moment and experience it. Then we're done and we die and we stop experiencing it. So eternity for us is and can only be right now. So do your best to pay attention. Whatever this is, there is something you can do with it. There is some option. Take it. Go flying. And that's, I just think, this really bolstering message, and especially compared to the opening statement, which is like, hey, look, all we've got is misery and suffering, right? This little opening piece here, he's giving the counterpoint to that argument. So that which could have been a barrier to some people, is that's basically the theme that he's grappling with. It's not a point of view that he's representing in the book. Here you can see another style he's switched, and this seems like he's talking about a dream. And he says, I have reason to be angry with you. I have reason to not let you go. I haven't decided what I will do. And so he's talking there about, some of the anger that comes. Something else that I thought was really interesting is how he was saying there was maybe certain things in their relationship that he was angry about that he probably never would have dealt with until his ex-fiance died. And that's something that Tori and I have both been experiencing as well, that there's a way that you can, certain things that you need to deal with aren't possible until someone's gone, or until you get put in a situation like we're put in that forces you to put your relationship under a microscope. And so there's growth in those moments of pain, and I thought that was really nice. Here's another thing that Anders Nilsen does a lot of that I've always really enjoyed, is kind of drawn right on top of photographs, and that lets him speak again in scope. I think that's really nice. Here's a really interesting thing where he's now kind of, in his real life, it seems like, found someone else that he's kind of interested in, but he feels guilty about that, like a year or so later, it seems like. And he's having a conversation with his past fiance, and he's acknowledging that she's not there, and she's like, I'm not her. I don't know what you're looking for. You're just talking to himself. And he asks her, if I fall in love, will you haunt me? And she says, I will always haunt you no matter what. And he says, promise? Promise. And so it's in this way he's talking to himself and giving himself permission, which is, you got to have that, but also like it's a bit weird of a thing to do. Is like I'm giving my self permission to move on from you, but people need to have that as well. So it's a really interesting moment filled with conflict, and he knows these things are unresolvable as well, so he never tries to fully resolve them. He just gives you kind of the emotional impact of it, and that's plenty. Here, I don't know if it shows up on camera, but he's got his map thing, and it's really nice where it's printed in a really dark, like maybe 90% gray, and then on top of that is a black, and so you can barely see it, but there's a figure in there. Just, really kind of attentive to production. Here's another really great, just symbolic moment, just to show the power of how much he can say without words as well, where he's got this flame that he's had to box up, this thing that's been burning him and charring him off and on throughout the book, that he's had to box up and then basically store inside. So those kind of things, and seeing his ability both as someone who just writes and someone who can communicate without words, and how they go together, the different variations, is really nice. Then in the back, he's talking about what this is and why he's done a third collection, and now that he's 16 years away from this, he feels like he has a lot more to share about what he's learned, and collecting also some of Cheryl, who was his fiance who died, sharing some of her artwork and things like that. So this is interesting afterwards, and I'm really glad that I got this book in what maybe its final form, maybe not. But I think for him to have 16 years passed and moved on in life, I think that's about, it would be about how long it's been since I've been divorced, maybe a little longer for me. But talking about, how important and foundational these lost moments are in your life, but also how small they can become in retrospect, like that's just not something that's part of my life anymore. And the ability to reflect on that with hindsight from someone that's so thoughtful is really, really nice. So he has 5 things that he's learned over the last 16 years. I particularly like this bit because it's relevant to, a topic that I keep coming back to on the channel, and I keep seeing showing up in books and stuff. But he says, "We make meaning from meaninglessness by putting events into the structure of a story, and we cement it into reality in repeated tellings. For me, the time and attention of my family and friends was a tremendous gift. That I have the resources to be that friend is nevertheless still something I occasionally have to remind myself of." And what he's talking about there is that his family and friends just gave him room to talk, and that through talking, he was able to narrativize what happened to him and make sense of it. And so it wasn't such a terrible grasping anymore because he could put it in a story. And he knows that that's a gift that he needs to repay to people, but is also aware that, especially I'm sure as an artist, you tend to get caught up in your own stories and your own goals and things like that. And so it was a good reminder for me too that, I need to be more willing to do that, and even for Tori, as she continues to deal with what she does with, we're both having to narrativize and do that for each other. And I just think those kind of messages, that's like real adult content. It's really deep and powerful and thoughtful and great advice. So that's all really fascinating. Another thing that he does that's really interesting is, even though he's doing autobiography, like this is just another little piece that he did in obviously in a sketchbook later about going and doing book signings and stuff. So autobiographical diary comics. But the Contemplation here is unlike most people like who draw a book about an encounter with the fan, where it seems to be like a story about how strange and weird people are. This is a story where he goes home and he's wondering about the impact that he had on that person. I don't want to say what the interaction was, but I really thought that outward focus thing thinking about how you're impacting other people rather than thinking about how other people are impacting you makes a huge difference. And maybe is another thing as I keep grappling with why I like certain autobiography and why I really dislike others, is maybe it's that inward versus outward focus. The kind of solipsistic stuff doesn't really speak to me, I don't think, but when someone's contemplating their relationship with the world and others, then you get a book like this that I think really has a lot to offer. Also, just in terms of like the presentation, how careful he is about, I'm going to present this as like notebooks pages, this one I'm going to scan and take it off. He's really choosing when and where to document things as objects, and that extends to in the back. I'm not sure how I feel about this, but he's presenting some of Cheryl's artwork, and there's some of that where it's like, I don't know, like obviously this book would sell without it, so it's not like he's selling the book based on that, but it's like, oh, we needed some extras, so let's throw that in there. That's a little, it's like sketchy territory for me, but it also seems like, no, this is someone you cared about and they thought they did great stuff and you want to share that. So like anything else in life, it's a little messy, but it's really nice. And again, the fact that he's documenting these things like through photographs, they have shadows on them, they're really presented as objects, and this is obviously something they both probably valued as artists. Obviously we're both artists and they were going to get married, so I'm sure they had plenty of conversations. This is obviously the tactility of things and the materiality of things they really value, and so that shows up in these at the end. And it does help because you do get a sense of like her poetic nature and her thoughtful nature, and then you see, you can go back and, like I said, you can understand how their two worldviews were formed together. Obviously they were younger, and so they had to have had an impact on each other philosophically and artistically, and so that does cross-inform the work in an interesting way that I think really justifies putting this in at the end, even though there is that bit of like, I could see why some people would think it's ick. The other thing in terms of like tactility is it's all printed on like a really nice fabric canvas type of thing, so the book has that tactile feel that makes it like just a little bit extra special. So I really think this is probably the most touching book I've ever read on the idea of grief. There was that other book that I did a review of, Knox, that was supposed to be like a archive of grief about someone's brother, and it was just the deadest, coldest, didn't impact me at all, even though it was all materially tricky and stuff. Whereas this book, I think, has the exact right balance, and I think it's, like I said, it's outward focused. It feels like a gift to people, like, hey, I went through this terrible, terrible experience, but I learned a lot, and maybe it can help you. And so I think anyone who's dealing with loss of any kind, it doesn't have to be a death, whether it be divorce or loss of a job, or just like in our case, loss of ability to go do everything we want because there's physical constraints on one of us. Now, anything like that, I think there's a lot to be drawn from this book. And if you haven't gone through something like that, that don't we all wish, but I think that this would be, something that could help you, so when it comes, as it will, it's not so unfamiliar. I think this book has really a lot to offer, so definitely go get yourself a copy of it if you don't have it. If you have earlier versions of it, I'm not sure what's been taken out and added to it, but I quite like the essay at the end about the 5 things that he's learned, and I think that would be a reason to upgrade. I don't know what the earlier versions look like either, so I think this as a package is a really nice package. But even just for those 5 things I've learned, I think this would be well worth a grab. So I hope you all go and get yourself a copy of this. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and want to support us, there's 2 different ways to do that. The first is through our Patreon. We have 2 tiers of engagement on Patreon. At the first tier, you get early access to the videos that we make. At the second tier, you get exclusive previews of the graphic novels that Sean and I are working on, as well as the ability to participate in our ongoing webcomic experiment, Prone Day, where you can vote to help determine what happens next in the story. Any of the money that we get from Patreon just helps us buy the books that we review, so that helps the channel keep going. It lets us put money in other creators' pockets, other publishers' pockets. We really appreciate that. If you want to support Living the Line itself, the best thing to do is support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of his books now. House on Fire by Matt Battaglia is just gorgeous book where Matt's kind of making an emotional response to the years of COVID and wrapping that into a sci-fi dystopian future that really the sci-fi dystopian's backgrounded and you're focused on the emotional journey of two characters in a really beautiful way. And then that's enhanced by Matt's like really awesome, loose, kind of Paul Popish dry brush work. And then Sean and Matt have worked to get this second kind of orange spot color in there that's going to look really, really beautiful, and it has allowed Matt to use his dry brush technique to add tone to the thing too. So with Sean's production technique, this is going to be a gorgeous book with a lot of heart.
Like and subscribe and hit the bell, please, so Carson can finish reading his books and let me go home.